Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Leave a message on our socials. Our handles are all just Nightwatch Files without the space, or head over to nightwatchfiles.com to find them all in one place. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Nightwatch Files. On a foggy December evening in 1987, Marie Grossman had spent the entire day in back-to-back meetings at the Cleveland Clinic, negotiating mental health services for her company's network. By 6:05 p.m., she was running late for her son's wrestling match at Hawkins School. She had 30 to 45 minutes to make it on time. If she hustled, she could grab something quick to eat and still arrive before the first whistle. As she drove past the ornate Victorian church at East 86th Street, she spotted the Burger King she'd passed dozens of times before. Through the window, she could see the restaurant was empty. Service would be fast. Marie pulled her blue Mustang around to the drive-thru. No one was ahead of her. She lowered her window and ordered 6 chicken tenders, then paused to consider her drink choice. That's when the man appeared. In the fading light, she saw him clearly, very tall, thin, with bloodshot eyes and perspiration on his face despite the cold. He held a revolver 6 inches from her temple. His finger went to his lips, the universal sign for silence. Marie had been an attorney. She knew what the experts said about robberies. Comply, hand over your money, don't resist. She reached for her purse in the center console, grabbed it, and held it by the open window. "Here is my purse," she said loudly, hoping the employee listening on the intercom might hear. The purse tumbled to the pavement. The gunman didn't move to take it. Then she saw his eyes flick across the roof of her car. Someone else was there. An accomplice. The gunman reached inside with his free hand. Marie asked loudly, "Do you want my car?" Again, hoping for an employee to be listening in on the exchange. He glared at her, finger to lips again. With the gun still at her temple, he opened her door and pushed the driver's seat forward, forcing his way toward the back seat. In that instant, Marie understood. They weren't taking her money. They weren't taking her car. They wanted her. A horrifying image flashed through her mind, her body dumped in a vacant lot. She had survived something like this once before, years ago. She would not survive it again. Whatever was going to happen would happen here. Right now, in this parking lot. Not at a second location. Not under their control. Marie squeezed the steering wheel in a death grip. She closed her eyes for just a second, knowing the immense risk she was about to take. Then she pressed down hard on the accelerator, followed by a loud bang going off. She was shot in the head. Marie Koborda was born on February 15, 1942, in Irvington, New Jersey, into a family that exemplified the possibilities of American social mobility. Her father came from origins that offered little promise. One of 8 children in a Slovakian immigrant family in Newark, he had left school after 8th grade during the Depression to work in a foundry and help keep his family afloat. But Walter Joseph Koborda refused to accept that trajectory as permanent. He went back, completed high school in 3 compressed years, and earned his way to Colgate University on an athletic scholarship. By the time Marie arrived, he had climbed to an executive position at the American Can Company. Her mother's path had been different, but equally determined. Miriam Snyder grew up under the care of a widowed mother who supported them by running a boarding house. Miriam finished high school at 16, earned her teaching degree from New Jersey State Teachers College, and worked both as a teacher and in retail. Together, Marie's parents built a household defined by stability and affection. The family started in a modest 2-bedroom flat in Irvington, where Marie shared a room with her younger sister. But as her father's career progressed, they moved to a more prosperous neighborhood in Garwood. Marie excelled in school and showed an early interest in art and drawing. She initially resisted joining the Girl Scouts, but eventually discovered she loved the camping and outdoor activities. The regional high school she attended drew students from 6 different towns, mixing children from working-class Garwood with those from wealthier Berkeley Heights. This proved transformative for Marie. Many of her classmates were the children of Bell Labs employees, and through them she glimpsed career possibilities she had never imagined. The conventional wisdom of the 1950s told young women they could become secretaries, nurses, or teachers. These new friends showed her there were other paths. She found her place among a tight circle of friends and threw herself into school life. As a majorette, she performed with her baton at Friday night football games, and she joined a group of students who took their twirling routines to local nursing homes to entertain the residents. She dated the team's quarterback, a reserved young man with whom she developed what those around them recognized as a genuinely close friendship, rather than just the surface romance of high school popularity. By the end of her junior year, their bond was well established, fitting the classic archetype of the majorette and the quarterback, and Marie's academic record had opened doors to numerous top-tier universities. The summer after her junior year, Marie traveled to the Jersey Shore with 9 other girls under the supervision of a young female teacher. They spent the first days at the beach and socializing at their cottage. An older teenager appeared one day, someone Marie knew from home, the older brother of one of her friends. When he invited her to his motel room to drink beer, she saw no reason to be afraid. She knew him. She knew his family. Inside the room, he grabbed her. The realization came too late that she was isolated, trapped, that screaming would accomplish nothing. He was stronger than her. Despite her resistance, he raped her and then released her back to her group. Marie walked to the ocean considering whether to wade in and not come back out. Her life felt ruined. The shame felt unbearable. The next morning, she sought help at the nearest church, ringing the doorbell until a minister answered. When she explained what had happened, he offered no comfort. Instead, he blamed her for putting herself in that situation. She walked back to the cottage and again thought about drowning herself. Eventually, she confided in some of her girlfriends. When her boyfriend arrived at the shore, she told him everything. He said little in response, but she sensed his fury on her behalf, his desire to take some kind of action without them having to speak it aloud. She wondered if he and his football teammates might hunt down her assailant, but they never discussed it again, and she never learned if anything happened. When she returned home, Marie made a decision. She would not tell her parents. She would not report the rape to police. The shame felt too heavy, the sense of responsibility too confusing. She tried to bury what had happened and move forward. That fall, she began her studies at Duke University. She sampled various courses and found herself drawn toward art history, but her practical-minded father encouraged her toward a more traditional field, and she switched to psychology. The South shocked her. Coming from New Jersey, she had never witnessed the stark reality of Jim Crow segregation, the whites-only drinking fountains, the rigid enforcement of racial barriers she could barely comprehend. The campus itself presented its own challenges. Male students outnumbered women 4-1, and the dress code forbade women from wearing slacks to class. Without sorority houses available, Marie lived in the same dormitory with the same group of women for all 4 years. These circumstances forged friendships that would endure for decades, as author David Maraldi notes in his book, The Edge of Malice, about Marie's life. Near the end of her junior year, she met Chuck Grossman. Though they shared a graduation year, their paths had never crossed. He studied electrical engineering while she focused on psychology. Chuck first noticed Marie when he saw her photograph in a campus magazine after she had been named a campus duchess. Her face captivated him, but he held back from approaching her while she was involved with other men. When she became available, he asked her out. Marie accepted without knowing much about him beyond the fact that he was friendly with one of her ex-boyfriends. Their connection was immediate, and the relationship accelerated quickly toward marriage after graduation. They moved to San Diego, where Chuck took a position with General Dynamics. Marie pursued the coursework and student teaching necessary to become a certified elementary school teacher. When Chuck was accepted to Harvard Business School, they relocated to the Boston area. Marie taught third grade in Malden and tutored struggling students in Roxbury. During this period, she marched alongside Martin Luther King Jr. in protests against Boston's segregated schools. After Chuck completed his MBA, they settled in Cleveland so he could join his family's business, manufacturing fire-retardant clothing. Marie accepted a teaching position at a third-grade classroom in Tremont, one of the city's inner-city neighborhoods. The experience proved frustrating. School bureaucracy demanded she use standard curriculum materials with students who read far below grade level, setting them up for failure. Marie rewrote the books herself, adapting the content to match her students' abilities and experiences. She secured a meeting with Cleveland's superintendent of schools to present her case for systematic change. He listened politely and did nothing. The futility of working within a broken system pushed Marie toward a different conclusion. If she wanted to create real change, she needed different tools. In 1968, she took the LSAT and enrolled at Case Western Reserve School of Law as one of only 6 women in her entering class. The discrimination was overt. One professor announced to the male students that they need not prepare for Saturday classes because he would only call on the women those days. Marie and her female classmates navigated these indignities without complaint. She discovered she was pregnant during her first month of law school and gave birth to her son Chas during her first year. The added responsibility did not diminish her performance. When first-year grades were posted, Marie ranked second in her class, a position she would maintain through graduation. She gave birth to her second son, Joe, on the day of the 1971 graduation ceremony, receiving her law degree from a hospital bed. Jones Day hired her as their first female associate permitted on the partnership track. She started part-time, transitioning to full-time by 1976, working on matters including the incorporation of the Playhouse Square Foundation and legal work for the Richfield Coliseum. Her summer associate position at the firm in 1970 had led to this permanent role. By October 1978, Marie recognized that pursuing partnership would require sacrifices she was unwilling to make regarding work-life balance. She moved to the legal department of Cleveland Trust Company, which later became Ameritrust. Colleagues knew her for offering bold, practical legal counsel and for a professional style that balanced power with femininity. She mentored younger women entering the legal field and eventually took on leadership of the bank's acquisition of Republic Steel's Health Claims Administration, effectively serving as CEO of that operation for 3 years. During this period, she achieved the best physical conditioning of her life through rigorous exercise routines, aerobics classes, and visits to wellness resorts like Canyon Ranch. By July 1987, Marie was ready for something new. She left Ameritrust to join Preferred Healthcare, where her assignment involved developing mental health provider networks across Cleveland. That fall, she was 45 years old, living in Lakewood with Chuck. Chas had left for college and Joe was wrestling for Hawkins School. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On the evening of October 24, 1987, Brittany Kirkpatrick had spent the evening with friends in the Flats, a Cleveland entertainment district, visiting establishments such as Shooters and Coconuts. Around 11:30 p.m., she left to drive home, and as she made her way through the city, she pulled into the drive-thru of the Burger King at 8515 Euclid Avenue. 3 cars were ahead of her at the menu board, which gave her a sense of security as she waited her turn. After Kirkpatrick placed her order, 2 men suddenly ran toward her car. She attempted to roll up her driver's side window, but was too late A man with a gun reached the vehicle, yelled at her to move over, and ordered her to unlock the door. When she complied, one man climbed into the back seat while the other entered the front passenger seat. The man in the back seat held a gun to her neck and ordered her to drive out of the lot, warning her not to look suspicious or they would shoot her. The assailants demanded her asset card, an ATM card, so they could withdraw money, but Kirkpatrick told them she didn't have one. Because she had no card, they took her purse and rummaged through it while she drove, taking the cash from her wallet and her Visa card. One of the men felt around her neck for jewelry, but because she was wearing a high-collared dress, he found nothing, and when he asked about rings, there were none to find. As they drove, the men argued about what to do with her. The man beside her said, "Just let her out," while the man in the back seat said, "No way." Eventually, Kirkpatrick stopped the car at 93rd Street and Chester Avenue, where the men agreed to release her and take the car. They ordered her out and threatened to shoot her if she watched them drive away. Kirkpatrick turned away from the car, and the men drove off in her vehicle. 3 weeks later, between 10:50 and 11 p.m. on November 14, 1987, Carol Thornton arrived at the drive-thru of the Popeyes restaurant at 8210 Euclid Avenue, just a few blocks from the Burger King. 2 cars were ahead of her in line. A man approached her driver's side window, well-dressed and not initially appearing menacing, which caused Thornton to have trouble understanding what he wanted. When he grew impatient, he pulled a gun from his pocket, pointed it at her neck, and ordered her to move over. Thornton unlocked the door. The man entered the driver's seat and ordered Thornton to unlock all doors. A second man entered the rear seat. The first man handed the gun to the man in the back seat, who held it against Thornton's neck. They asked for an asset card, and Thornton initially stated she didn't have one, then realized they meant a bank card and told them she had a Bank One card. The man in the driver's seat pulled out of the lot onto Euclid Avenue, and they drove around aimlessly, making several wrong turns while looking for a Bank One ATM. Thornton suggested a location she knew at Cedar and Fairmount. When they arrived, the men argued about who would get out. The accomplice in the back seat didn't want to exit because he had the gun and there were people nearby. The driver ordered him to pocket the gun and go with Thornton. The accomplice followed her to the machine, standing behind her the entire time to prevent her from seeing his face. She withdrew the maximum of $250, which he grabbed, then ordered her to withdraw another $50. Thornton was ordered to walk in front of the accomplice back to the car, and all 3 re-entered the vehicle. They drove around debating what to do next. Thornton encouraged them to take the car and drop her at a bus stop, and they eventually stopped at Fairhill near Baldwin. The men ordered Thornton out of the car and drove away in her vehicle. The entire ordeal had lasted approximately 1 hour to 1 hour and a half. On the morning of December 11, 1987, Marie Grossman rose at 7 o'clock, showered, and dressed in a rust-colored business suit. By 8 o'clock, she had backed her blue, 2-door Mustang onto Lake Road in Lakewood, Ohio, to begin her commute to the Cleveland Clinic. The morning was shrouded in heavy fog with visibility of less than 2 blocks, and as she merged onto the shoreway, she encountered bumper-to-bumper traffic. She listened to radio news regarding the conclusion of a 3-day summit between President Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. A red Ford Fiesta cut into her lane, and though she prepared to honk, she decided to give the driver a free pass. She turned off the radio to mentally prepare for her upcoming meetings. Marie parked in one of the Cleveland Clinic's parking garages and walked briskly to the main building. In the central lobby, she met her colleague, John Wellston, and together they met with the head of the clinic's psychiatric department. They spent the morning attending a series of back-to-back meetings with psychiatrists and administrators to determine what mental health services the clinic could provide for Preferred Healthcare's network. At lunch, Marie grabbed a quick salad in the hospital cafeteria, and the afternoon continued with sessions similar to the morning meetings. At 5:30 p.m., the last appointment finished. John Wellston asked if she had time for coffee, but Marie declined, noting she had to get to her son's wrestling match, though she agreed to talk for 10 minutes. They sat in an empty waiting area near the psychiatry check-in desk, and Wellston reviewed their notes, highlighting major points and follow-up items. At 6:05 p.m., Marie checked her watch and told Wellston she needed to wrap up. As they prepared to leave, Wellston asked Marie to follow up with a numbers guy named Silverton, then offered to walk her to her car. Marie declined, noting there should still be plenty of people in the parking garage. As Marie drove away from the clinic, she assessed her time. She had 30 to 45 minutes to reach Hawkins School for her son's wrestling match. She realized she was hungry because she'd had a light lunch and decided that if she hustled, she could buy fast food and still arrive on time. She recalled the location of a Burger King at Euclid and East 85th Street, having passed it many times on her way to University Circle. Marie drove past a turreted Victorian limestone church at East 86th and pulled her Mustang into the front parking lot. She glimpsed the restaurant's interior and noted there were no patrons inside, which convinced her that service would be fast. She drove behind the building and spotted the menu board to her left, observing that there was no one ahead of her. Richard Thompson was born around 1968 in Louisiana and moved with his family to Cleveland, Ohio at approximately 5 years old as his parents sought better paying employment. He was raised in a stable, working-class family in Cleveland's Huff neighborhood, the second of 4 children with an older brother and 2 younger sisters. His mother was a high school teacher and a faithful Baptist who took Richard to church every Sunday until he refused to go at the age of 14. His father worked a variety of jobs, including as a security guard at the same high school where his wife taught, and was a strong presence in the community who coached youth basketball teams at the YMCA. Thompson became a high school basketball star, but his athletic success masked a troubling academic reality. Teachers did not require him to do much work and passed him to maintain his athletic eligibility, which allowed him to develop a belief that rules did not apply to him. He began using marijuana and cocaine in high school, occasionally getting high before basketball games. When he failed a civics course, he did not graduate with his class, and the full athletic scholarship he had been offered to Purdue University was revoked because of his academic failure. He eventually attended summer school to receive his diploma, but the scholarship was not reinstated. Thompson maintained a long-term friendship with Christopher Martin, who became the dominant personality in their relationship. Martin was short, stocky, and muscular with what the book The Edge of Malice described as a constant sneer that warned of latent anger. He was characterized as fearless, without conscience, and a bullshit artist who was not to be trusted. By 1987, he was a heavy user of marijuana and cocaine and viewed the legal system with disdain, referring to courtroom proceedings on television as merely entertainment and not real life. Thompson's mother would later claim that Martin introduced her son to drugs and devised their robbery schemes. Martin and Thompson began robbing people not as a desperate measure, but as a way to make money to support their drug habits and lifestyle. Martin devised the specific modus operandi for their crimes: loitering in fast food restaurant parking lots, identifying lone female drivers, and forcing them to withdraw money from ATMs. He and Thompson stole a .38 caliber revolver from a neighbor's home, which they would later use during their crime spree. The police were acutely aware of the dangerous environment surrounding the fast food drive-thrus in the Huff and Fairfax neighborhoods, as well as the specific lack of security measures in place during the crime spree in late 1987. Their knowledge was derived from general crime statistics, direct investigations of the specific robberies, and their familiarity with the location's physical layouts. The police classified the Huff and Fairfax neighborhoods, where the Burger King at 8515 Euclid and Popeyes at 8210 Euclid were located, as 2 of the city's highest crime areas. Census-tract records from the Cleveland Police Department revealed more than 1,645 criminal incidents within blocks of the Burger King in 1986 alone. Police officers acknowledged that businesses in this area were frequently robbed at gunpoint. By the time of the October and November crimes, the police had gathered detailed information establishing a distinct pattern of behavior by the perpetrators. Detective Joseph Novak investigated the robbery of Brittany Kirkpatrick at the Burger King drive-thru on October 24th, and his report detailed the two men demanding an asset card during their attack. Novak also investigated the robbery of Carol Thornton at the nearby Popeyes on November 14th, and his report noted the exact same modus operandi, targeting a lone woman at a drive-thru, forcing entry, and demanding an asset card. The police linked these incidents based on the perpetrators' physical descriptions, one short, one tall and thin, and their unique terminology for bank cards, realizing that the same men were terrorizing women in the area. On December 11, 1987, Richard Thompson woke up feeling disoriented and groggy on a mattress on the floor of Christopher Martin's apartment. He realized it was morning and that he was still at Martin's because they had gotten high the night before, and he'd been too wasted to walk home through the dangerous Huff neighborhood. Later in the morning, Thompson and Martin drove to Thompson's house in Richard's blue Chevy. Thompson's parents were at work and his sisters were at school, so the house was empty and they smoked marijuana Thompson had stashed there while watching television on a small black and white set in the living room. Around 2:30 p.m., the pair returned to Martin's apartment, where they shared a few joints with Martin's girlfriend until they smoked the last of Martin's supply. At 4:30 p.m., Martin told his girlfriend that they needed to go out and make money, their euphemism for robbery. As they got into Thompson's blue Chevy, Thompson suggested hitting Burger King, and Martin agreed, claiming he needed to check on his own car, a maroon Camaro, which was broken down in that lot. As Thompson started the car, he felt for the .38 caliber revolver in his left jacket pocket. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. They arrived at the Burger King at 8515 Euclid Avenue around 4:45 p.m., just as the sun was setting. They parked in the rear lot, and Thompson got out to check for surveillance cameras, peering into the front window to look for a security guard. He reported back to Martin that there were no cameras and no guard. For the next hour and a half, they remained in the rear parking lot, watching approximately 50 customers use the drive-thru while waiting for their specific target profile, a lone woman with no other cars behind her. While they waited, they got out of the car and walked around the lot. Around 6:20 p.m., there was a lull in traffic. Marie Grossman's blue Mustang turned off Euclid Avenue and approached the drive-thru, and both men saw she was the sole occupant. As she approached the order board, both men got out of their car. Marie pulled her Mustang up to the menu board. A female voice asked for her order, and Marie lowered her window and ordered 6 chicken tenders. While she considered her drink choice, Richard Thompson suddenly slipped between the menu board and her car, pointing a revolver through the open window and positioning it no more than 6 inches from Marie's temple. He held a finger to his lips, using the universal sign for Marie to remain quiet. In the dim light, Marie observed that her assailant was a very tall, thin, African-American male with short cropped hair and a day's growth of stubble. She noted his eyes were deeply bloodshot, and he was perspiring despite the cold weather. Marie assumed she was being robbed and, recalling expert advice to comply during a robbery, decided to hand over her money and credit cards immediately. She reached into the middle console near the gear shift, picked up her purse, and held it by the open window. Hoping the Burger King employee listening on the intercom would hear her, she said aloud, "Here is my purse." She placed the purse on the window ledge and released her grip, but it fell to the pavement, spilling some contents onto the asphalt. Thompson made no effort to catch or retrieve it. Thompson gestured and looked across the roof of the car, making eye contact with someone else, and Marie realized for the first time that the gunman had an accomplice. Thompson reached inside the car with his free hand, and Marie asked, "Do you want my car?" Again hoping to alert the employee inside. Thompson glared at her, and once again held a finger to his lips to silence her. Using his left hand, Thompson opened the driver's side door and quickly slipped his hand behind the driver's seat, pushing it forward and attempting to force his way into the back seat. Marie's mind worked to reach a terrifying conclusion. Because the men rejected her money and her vehicle, she realized, my God, they want me. Drawing on the traumatic experience from her past, she vividly understood the violence, the ugliness, and the shame of sexual assault, and concluded that she was about to be raped. A horrific image flashed in Marie's mind of her dead body being dumped into a vacant lot. Faced with the probability of abduction, rape, and death, she made a definitive split-second choice. She would not be raped again. She decided that whatever was going to happen to her would happen right here, right now, in the parking lot, rather than at a second location under the control of her abductors. With the .38 caliber revolver hovering just inches from her temple, Marie squeezed the steering wheel in a death grip. She closed her eyes for a brief second to steel herself for the immense risk she was about to take. Marie then pressed her right foot down on the accelerator, and as the car surged forward, she heard an explosion that violently rocked her body to the right. She realized instantly that she had been shot in the head, though she didn't know the specific location of the wound. Her hands remained clutching the steering wheel, but her right foot slid off the accelerator, and looking down, she observed that her coat was already drenched in blood. She was amazed that she was still alive and capable of thought. She looked out the open window to her left and saw that the gunman was gone, noting that her car had drifted forward, closer to the building. Seeing the Cleveland Clinic's main office tower looming over nearby apartments, she realized, I'm going to bleed to death if I don't get help. I have to take control. She gently placed her right foot back on the accelerator and drove the car forward, pulling it even with the restaurant's side door. Her heart beat rapidly, pulsing in her eardrums, and she mentally coached herself. I have to remain conscious. I can't pass out. Get to the clinic now. As she unfastened her seatbelt, she realized her lower jaw was hanging over her chest, no longer attached to the upper jaw, and unable to move her jaw. She realized she was physically unable to talk. She left the car motor running, opened the door, and placed her left hand under her jaw to manually hold it closed. She stepped onto the concrete sidewalk, her high heels clattering on the surface, and one heel snagged on a crack, nearly causing her to fall. She regained her balance and lunged toward the door, opening it and staggering inside, making her way to the counter and leaving a trail of blood behind her. The restaurant was empty, except for a few teenage employees, who froze in their tracks upon seeing her, unsure of how to respond. Marie grabbed a pencil and a pre-printed order pad from the counter, tore out a page, turned it to the blank side, and wrote, "Take me to the Cleveland Clinic emergency room." She handed the note to a young employee, approximately 17 or 18 years old. The bewildered teen said, "I'll call 911, but Marie shook her head and grabbed him by the sleeve, pulling him near the door and pointing to her car, which he recognized as hers because the motor was still running. He reached for the passenger door, ready to open it for her, but she hurried around him, pulled it open on her own, and climbed in without hesitation. He opened the door to the driver's seat, a small wave of relief washing over him when he saw there was no blood pooling beneath him. He tried his hardest to focus on his responsibility of getting her to the clinic as quickly and safely as he could, hoping she wouldn't bleed to death before they arrived. He followed her gestures out of the corner of his eye as she indicated each turn. At the main entrance, he watched her open the door and struggle with her balance as she reached the door. He remained in the car, trying to recollect his thoughts and realize he had done what she asked. Then he handed the keys to someone at the admissions desk and walked back to the restaurant. Two women sat at a window in a halfway house overlooking the Burger King parking lot that evening, the kind of facility that housed women transitioning back into society after time in jail or prison. Christy Washington and Sheila Williams had watched the two men for more than an hour as they lingered near a blue Chevy, periodically getting out to walk around, returning to the car, moving toward the drive-through lane and back again. They were still watching when the crack of the gunshot echoed across the lot. Both men bolted on foot, abandoning the vehicle in their panic. But 10 minutes passed and one of them returned. Thompson, walking back across the asphalt to retrieve his car as if the urgency had passed and he could simply drive away. The women at the window had seen enough. They wrote down the license plate number. Captain David Good and Lieutenant Moon reached the scene around 7 o'clock that evening, pulling information from the patrol officers who had responded first. The witnesses had provided descriptions of both suspects along with the plate number from the blue Chevy. When the trace came back, it showed the vehicle registered to Richard Thompson at an address in the surrounding neighborhood. The two officers headed toward Thompson's house to make the arrest. They never reached it. Driving through the streets toward the address, they spotted the blue Chevy traveling in the opposite direction. Lieutenant Moon swung the cruiser into a U-turn and pulled in behind Thompson's vehicle, activating the flashers. Thompson drove into a church parking lot and stopped. The officers approached with weapons drawn, ordering both occupants out. Thompson emerged from the driver's seat. Christopher Martin climbed out from the passenger side. Both men were frisked, handcuffed, and placed under arrest within minutes of the traffic stop. The evidence inside the vehicle eliminated any possibility of mistaken identity. Officers shined flashlights through the windows and saw a purse on the front floor beneath the passenger seat, credit cards scattered nearby. The cards bore Marie Grossman's name. In the glove compartment, they found a .38 caliber revolver. Later testing would confirm that one round had been fired recently. When police swabbed Thompson's right hand for gunshot residue, the results came back positive, marking him as the person who had pulled the trigger less than an hour earlier. Before Marie could be taken to surgery, a large medical team entered her treatment cubicle, including a plastic surgeon, an ENT specialist, and several residents. One doctor held her jaw in his left hand while moving her head side to side with his right, and several residents repeated this manipulation before the lead doctor used a penlight to assess the damage inside her mouth, confirming that the bullet had entered the left side of her jaw and exited the right, destroying jawbone, nerves, muscle, and teeth. Dr. James Zins, the head of the team and a plastic surgeon, explained what they would need to do. The wound would be thoroughly cleaned to prevent infection, and her jaw would be realigned and wired into place so it could not open at all. Because the jaw would be wired shut and nasal congestion posed a risk, doctors would create a hole in her neck and insert a tube to allow her to breathe through a tracheostomy. A nasoenteric feeding tube would be inserted down her nostril, through her throat, and into her stomach to provide nourishment. A few minutes after Dr. Zins explained the procedure, an orderly arrived to wheel Marie to the operating room, and Chuck kissed the top of her head and pressed her right hand before she was taken away. Quick break. Ads keep the show running. But if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Marie began to slowly regain consciousness in the recovery room around 10:30 p.m., and upon waking, she realized the surgery had been performed exactly as described. Her jaw was locked. A thin metal bar rimmed the gum line of her upper teeth, and another bar rimmed the lower teeth, with tiny rubber bands connecting the top and bottom bars, making it impossible to open her mouth. She felt the tracheostomy tube extending from the outside of her neck into her throat, and another tube, likely providing oxygen, dangled in front of her face and fed into the neck device, creating a sucking sound. Around 1 a.m., Marie was engulfed by nausea, and when she vomited a few minutes later, the matter was trapped against her teeth, which were wired shut. She described the sensation as hitting her locked teeth like a wave against a break wall. She momentarily panicked, fearing the liquid would block her tracheostomy tube and cause her to suffocate, but despite the pain, she forced herself to swallow it. She tried to remain calm, but could not use her normal coping mechanism of deep breathing because her mouth was wired, one nostril was clogged with a feeding tube, and she lacked confidence breathing through the tracheostomy. In the hours that followed, Marie felt helpless and frightened by her dependence on the maze of tubes and machines keeping her alive. She suffered from burning pain in her neck and back, but lacked the strength to shift her body to relieve it. She felt she had been alone for hours and worried that a tube might disconnect or clog without a nurse noticing. When she reached for her notepad to ask a nurse to reposition her, she lost her grip, and the pad tumbled to the floor beyond her reach. Unable to sleep, she rode an emotional roller coaster, oscillating between elation at having survived and terror as she replayed the memory of the shooter's face. She worried about whether she would successfully identify the assailant from the photographs the detective promised to bring. Detective Novak returned to the hospital room the next morning, still wearing his trench coat, and Marie greeted him by lifting her hand. Novak placed 6 black and white headshots of young African-American males on Marie's blanket, and only one face was long and thin. Marie placed her right hand over the photograph of the man with the long face and jabbed her index finger in the air to emphasize her certainty. Novak confirmed she had identified Richard Thompson, a 19-year-old male arrested the previous night, and informed her that the car used in the shooting was registered to Thompson and that Thompson had gunshot residue on his right hand. When Novak asked if she was absolutely sure, Marie blinked and looked away briefly, feeling the identification was almost too easy, but she dismissed her doubt, met Novak's eyes, and nodded slowly. Novak asked if she had seen the other guy, and when Marie shook her head no, he put away the photographs, noting there was no need for a second lineup. Before leaving, Novak told Marie she was a pretty lucky lady. A few hours later, Marie's friends Peggy and Gary Kuechly entered her ICU room after reading a brief article in the Cleveland Plain Dealer about the shooting, ignoring the hospital signs restricting visits to family only. They found Marie with her head slightly raised, her face swollen and bandaged, and blood still matted in her hair. Marie grabbed her notepad and wrote, "Glad to see you," and communicated for the next 5 minutes using short notes and head nods. Peggy found a washcloth and cleaned the blood from Marie's scalp and hair, while Gary used body lotion to massage Marie's feet. Peggy also combed Marie's hair, which significantly boosted her morale, and as the Kuechlys prepared to leave, Marie grabbed their hands and held them for a long time to express her appreciation. 3 days after the shooting, on December 14, 1987, Marie was moved from the ICU to a regular hospital room. She was strong enough to sit upright in bed and had begun walking the halls for exercise. Chuck Grossman called Leslie Miraldi, a friend and former colleague of Marie's at Ameritrust, at 9 a.m. to inform her of the shooting, and Leslie arranged for childcare and arrived at the hospital 2 hours later. Leslie expected Marie to be weak or near death, but instead found her animated and energetic, communicating rapidly via her notepad. Marie credited her resilience to the physical shape she was in prior to the shooting, specifically the fitness regime she learned at Canyon Ranch, and wrote to Leslie, "I want to regain what I've lost." While Leslie was visiting, a physician entered the room, and Marie nodded emphatically and rolled her hands in a circular motion like a football referee signaling illegal procedure, signaling Leslie to grill the doctor with questions Marie could not ask herself. The doctor informed them that Marie would likely be released in several days, and that the tracheostomy and nasogastric tubes could possibly be removed in another week. Significant bone loss had occurred, but they hoped the body would produce new bone, though it was uncertain if further surgeries would be needed or if she would have permanent limitations. The doctor emphasized that Marie was fortunate the bullet missed her tongue, which saved her ability to eventually speak normally. Marie informed Leslie via note that the perpetrators had been arrested, and despite her fear, Marie communicated her resolve to attend all court hearings, writing, "I'm very scared to face them, but I will go to all of their court hearings." 6 days after surgery, the hospital discharged Marie. Chuck felt the timing was premature and had reconciled himself to the early release, only because the hospital promised professional home care would bridge the gap. That first morning back, they waited for the nurse who was supposed to arrive at 10 o'clock to handle Marie's dressings and tube feeding. By 10:30, no one had appeared. Chuck called the agency and reached a scheduler who sounded cheerful and unbothered, acknowledging a mix-up and promising someone would come at 2 in the afternoon instead. The household had always run on Marie's management. She handled the children, the meals, the daily logistics that allowed Chuck to focus on his business. Now the dynamic had inverted completely. Marie could do nothing for herself. The nutrition packets sat stacked on the floor, waiting to be administered through the tube in her nose. Her surgical wounds needed cleaning and fresh dressings. Chuck had no medical training and no choice. He taught himself that morning how to squeeze liquid nutrition into the nasogastric tube, how to change her bandages, how to clean the tracheostomy opening in her throat. Despite the chaos and his own fear of doing something wrong, he managed. They even walked together up and down the driveway afterward. Marie scrawled on her notepad, "Can you believe I was shot in the head and can do all of this?" Chuck noticed she was smiling with her eyes for the first time since the shooting. She slept in a recliner in the living room because lying flat was impossible. Her face remained swollen and discolored, her nose irritated and red where the feeding tube snaked down into her stomach, her chest rising and falling with the mechanical rhythm of breathing through the hole in her neck. Chuck and Joe would watch her sleep and feel something between pity and anxiety. Joe found it difficult to look at her face. The woman in the recliner resembled someone else. "12 days after the shooting, Chuck drove Marie to the Cuyahoga County Justice Center for Richard Thompson's preliminary hearing. The building rose above downtown Cleveland like a honeycomb of concrete and glass, stark and cold inside. Marie wore a long navy overcoat and wrapped a plaid scarf around the lower half of her face to conceal the swelling, the distortion, the unhealed opening where the tracheostomy tube had been. The tubes themselves had been removed a week earlier, allowing her to breathe through her nose again, but her jaw remained wired completely shut. She could produce only unintelligible sounds. Outside courtroom 14B on the 14th floor, they met Detective Novak and Assistant Prosecutor Peter Young. Young explained Marie's role simply, stand up and point to Richard Thompson. Nothing more would be required. When guards brought Thompson into the courtroom in his orange jumpsuit and handcuffs, Marie's body reacted before her mind could intervene. Her heart hammered in her ears, her breathing accelerated. But watching him slump into his chair and stare blankly at the wall allowed her nervous system to settle. She pulled off her gloves and checked her hands, warm and dry. She was ready. Novak testified first, walking through the details of the arrest and the evidence. Marie heard for the first time about the other attacks: Brittany Kirkpatrick on October 24th, Carol Thornton on November 14. The same pattern, the same demand for asset cards, the same two men. She understood suddenly why her testimony mattered so much. The other women could identify Martin, but not his accomplice. Marie alone could put Thompson at the scene with the gun in his hand. When her turn came, Marie stood. Thompson towered over her at 6 feet 5 inches. She studied his face and then wrote on her pad, "This is the man who shot me. I am sure of it." The prosecutor read her words aloud. The judge found probable cause and set bond at $15,000, which Thompson could not pay. He would remain in custody. Marie refused to treat her injuries as an excuse to withdraw from life. In early January, still healing and still unable to open her mouth, she began driving herself to aerobics classes at River Oaks. The hospital had sent her home with cases of Ensure, but she disliked the corn syrup and started experimenting with her Cuisinart, blending fruit and vegetable purees she could consume through her clenched teeth. One morning she discovered she could force words out between her teeth, not her normal voice, garbled and strained, but comprehensible. It felt like a breakthrough after weeks of scribbling notes. 2 weeks later, a nurse removed the bands holding her jaw immobile. Marie felt a surge of hope when she managed to open her mouth a few millimeters. The next morning, she woke to excruciating pain radiating from her jaw joint. Dr. Zins ordered panoramic x-rays that revealed the brutal truth. The bone fragments had failed to fuse. Her body had reabsorbed them, leaving gaps on both sides of her jaw where solid bone should have formed. Zins explained what would be necessary. Another major surgery to realign both sides of her jaw, a metal plate installed on the left, bone harvested from her hip to fill the right side gap, and the part that terrified her most, conscious intubation through her nose before anesthesia. Until then, the bands went back on and he prescribed Valium for the pain. Chuck sensed her depression deepening and took her to Hilarities, a comedy club in the warehouse district. They sat at a rear table in the darkness where no one could see her swollen face. Marie's mind churned with fears she could not silence. Would the pain ever end? Would her face remain disfigured? Would she even be strong enough to testify when the trial finally happened? Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Early February brought news that Thompson and Martin had been indicted and the case transferred to Common Pleas Court under prosecutor Robert Christieson. A pretrial was scheduled for February 10th, but Marie's second surgery was set for February 9th. She made arrangements to call Christieson after she was discharged to stay informed. The day of surgery arrived and Marie was wheeled into the operating room at the Cleveland Clinic. The intubation had to happen while she remained conscious so the anesthesiologist could navigate around her damaged jaw. When the tube pushed through her nose and down her throat, Marie felt certain she was suffocating. She closed her eyes against the panic. When she opened them, large hands filled her vision, blocking everything else. Someone ordered more Ativan. Darkness came. 8 hours passed before she surfaced in the recovery room, engulfed not by relief, but by unrelenting pain in her throat, her left hip where they had cut away bone, both sides of her jaw. 4 days later, she was home again. The bands would stay on her jaw for 3 weeks, but at least there was no tracheostomy tube this time. She could force words through her wired teeth. She called Christieson, who explained the prosecution's strategy. The other victims could identify Martin, but not Thompson. Marie was the only witness who could place Thompson at the scene. They were negotiating a deal. Thompson would testify against Martin in exchange for dropped charges on the other robberies. He would plead guilty only to Marie's shooting and face roughly 10 years. His testimony would lock in Martin's conviction despite Martin's alibi witnesses and criminal record, making him fight harder. On February 25th, Thompson accepted the deal. He pled guilty to the charges from Marie's case, waived his right to a speedy trial, and agreed to testify against Martin. The trial date was pushed from March 1st to March 31st. When the bands came off after the February surgery, Marie began the prescribed jaw exercises. She quickly realized something was still wrong. Her jaw would not move laterally. More x-rays. The verdict: a third surgery was necessary. Zins would harvest bone from her right hip this time to repair the left side and install another metal reconstruction plate on the right. Another conscious intubation. Marie felt the terror building again. She notified Christieson that the surgery was scheduled for March 23rd, and she would not be released until around March 27th, too weak and 2 freshly wired shut to testify. Christensen filed for another continuance. The March 23rd surgery was long and brutal. Afterward, her jaw was wired shut for another 4 weeks. The swelling that developed under her left eye was grotesque. She looked as though someone had beaten her with a baseball bat. Zins had to insert a drain 3 days post-op. Marie stopped looking in mirrors. Friends who had visited regularly in the early months came less often now. When Christensen called to say the trial had been moved to late May, Marie felt forgotten and profoundly alone. On May 25, 1988, Marie sat in the back of courtroom 17A with the other 2 victims, Carol Thornton and Brittany Kirkpatrick, meeting them for the first time. Marie's face was still puffy from the March surgery, and although the arch bars had been removed and she had worked to open her jaw from 6 millimeters to 19 millimeters, she was still on a liquid diet and had permanent nerve damage that affected her speech and ability to eat. Brittany Kirkpatrick was tall and thin with a fair Celtic complexion, and she appeared trembling and frightened, while Carol Thornton seemed confident and knowledgeable about the case details. Carol informed the group that Martin had alibi witnesses, including a co-employee, and was waiving a jury trial to let the judge decide. The case was assigned to Judge Carl Character, an African-American judge recently appointed by Governor Celeste, and Marie knew he was a former law partner of Carl and Louis Stokes and respected his intelligence. When Christopher Martin entered wearing jeans and a black and gray sweatshirt, he swaggered and stared at the 3 women in an attempt to intimidate them. Defense attorney Timothy Gauntner realized the 3 prosecution witnesses were sitting together in the courtroom and moved for a dismissal of all charges, arguing their identification would be tainted by observing Martin in court before testifying. Judge Character overruled the dismissal but ordered a separation of witnesses, requiring them to leave the courtroom and wait in the hall. Assistant Prosecutor Christensen delivered opening statements, arguing that Martin and another man, Thompson, committed 3 crimes using a signature modus operandi of demanding asset cards at drive-thrus, stating Martin was the gunman in the first 2 robberies and present for Marie's shooting. Gauntner gave a 2-sentence opening, stating simply that his client was not present at any of the robberies and had an alibi. The trial resumed the following morning, May 26, 1988, and Marie Grossman, accompanied by her husband Chuck and son Joe, arrived at the courtroom 30 minutes before the scheduled start. At 9:55 a.m., Prosecutor Robert Christensen told Marie he would call her first, but declined to go over the questions, confident she knew the answers. When Marie took the stand, Christopher Martin attempted to intimidate her with a glare, but she focused on the judge. Freed from her surgical wires, she spoke clearly, explaining the events of December 11, Thompson's approach, the gun at her temple, her refusal to let him in, and the gunshot. She described the bullet's trajectory, entering the left cheek and exiting the right, and her subsequent surgeries and permanent impairments. She identified Richard Thompson from the photo lineup as the shooter, but admitted she did not see anyone else at the scene, setting the stage for Thompson to implicate Martin. The defense declined to cross-examine her. As Thompson took the stand in his orange jail jumpsuit, defense attorney Timothy Gauntner objected, arguing that the uncorroborated testimony of a co-defendant should be excluded, but Judge Character overruled the objection. Thompson testified that the robbery was Martin's plan and that Martin provided the gun, claiming Martin stood by the car and gave instructions. He stated the shooting was accidental, saying the car door hit the gun and the gun went off, though he omitted the fact that they drove his car, the blue Chevy, to the scene, instead implying they were in Martin's car. On cross-examination, Gauntner highlighted that Thompson received a plea deal with 6 charges dropped to testify and suggested he was lying to save himself, and Thompson admitted to the deal but denied lying. Captain David Good testified that witnesses saw a blue Chevy and a maroon Camaro at the scene and described arresting Thompson and Martin in the blue Chevy, finding Marie's purse, bank card, and the gun inside. Detective Joseph Novak testified regarding the operability of the .38 caliber revolver to satisfy the gun specification charges, and the prosecution rested its case before the lunch recess. The defense called 3 alibi witnesses. Charles Winter testified that Martin was working for him at the Togo Suite Club from 9:30 p.m. to 3 a.m. on November 14th, the night of the Thornton robbery. Though under cross-examination, he admitted he did not see Martin constantly and kept no written records. The prosecution moved to exclude Carla Martin, the defendant's sister, because she violated the separation of witnesses order by sitting in the courtroom, but the judge allowed her to testify while warning the defense. She testified that Martin and Winter came to her house at 11:30 p.m. on November 14th, directly contradicting Winter's testimony that they were at the club from 9:30 p.m. onward, and she became belligerent during cross-examination, arguing with the prosecutor. Juanita Martin, the defendant's mother, testified that on December 11th, Christopher was home all day with a foot injury, and that Richard Thompson came by alone at 7:10 p.m. Under cross-examination, she admitted Martin owned the maroon Camaro found at the Burger King crime scene, but claimed it had been there for days. In closing arguments, Christieson argued that Martin and Thompson committed 3 crimes with a signature MO and attacked the credibility of the alibi witnesses, noting the conflicting timelines between Martin's sister and employer. Gauntner argued that the eyewitness identifications were unreliable due to fear and memory gaps, that Thompson was a liar who made a deal, and that Martin had a valid alibi. Judge Character immediately issued his ruling. Christopher Martin was guilty on all counts. Sentencing was set for June 27th. On June 27, 1988, the courtroom was subdued. Marie, Chuck, and Joe sat in the second row with Prosecutor Christieson in front of them, while Richard Thompson sat hunched and prayer-like, and Christopher Martin sat upright and glowering. Thompson's attorney asked for the minimum sentence, citing his cooperation, and Thompson apologized, stating, "I didn't mean to shoot Mrs. Grossman. That was an accident." Judge Character sentenced Thompson to 5 to 25 years on count 1 and 3 to 15 years on count 2 to run concurrently, and he was sent to the Ohio State Reformatory. Family members in the gallery gasped and cried as he was led away. Martin denied responsibility, saying only, "I'm sorry for what happened to the lady. That's it." Judge Character scolded Martin for bringing shame and disrepute to the black community and terrorizing women, sentencing him to 10 to 25 years for each of the 3 robberies, plus 3 years for gun specifications, with the sentences to run consecutively. When Martin asked what consecutive meant and was told he must serve the terms one after another, he became angry, arguing, "I watched this case on TV where the guy did," before the judge snapped, "I don't care what you watched on television. This is real life." Martin continued to argue he received an unfair trial based on circumstantial evidence, and the judge informed him of his right to appeal. When Martin asked if he was eligible for shock parole, a sentencing approach that places an offender in custody for a brief but deliberately harsh stint, typically lasting anywhere from a month to 4 months. The goal is to use the abrupt exposure to incarceration as a wake-up call, after which the individual is released under supervised probation or parole. The judge suppressed a smile and said, "No, sir." Shortly after the sentencing, Marie left a message with Assistant Prosecutor Robert Christieson's secretary with 2 specific questions. She wanted to know when the defendants would first be eligible for parole, and she requested that Christieson send the police file on the investigation to the attorney she had contacted regarding a potential civil lawsuit against Burger King. Marie eventually learned that neither defendant would be a threat to her for many years, and once the cases against Thompson and Martin were concluded, Christieson fulfilled his promise to send the reports to Marie's civil attorneys, having previously refused because internal rules forbade it while the criminal cases were active. A few weeks after Judge Character found Christopher Martin guilty, Marie's attorneys filed the civil lawsuit in the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas, naming Burger King Corporation, Harold Stillwater, the previous franchise owner, and Quick Eats Enterprises, Inc., the company to which Stillwater transferred ownership. The suit alleged negligence based on the defendant's failure to provide adequate security and included claims for punitive damages based on the belief that the defendants ignored the danger after the earlier abduction of Brittany Kirkpatrick, with Marie's husband Chuck included in the lawsuit for damages related to his wife's injuries. John Rasmussen, an attorney for Liberty Mutual, the franchisee's insurer, contacted Marie's lawyer David Miraldi, who would later write the book, The Edge of Malice, about Marie's case and her life. Rasmussen revealed that Harold Stillwater was a born-again Christian and a philanthropist who operated the inner-city restaurant to provide jobs, hinting at a defense strategy that would paint Stillwater as a benevolent figure victimized by crime. Frank Soldat, an attorney for Travelers Insurance, representing Burger King, contacted Miraldi's partner Ben Barrett and took a hard line, stating Burger King would pay nothing because the corporation did not operate the restaurant and had an indemnification agreement with the franchisee, announcing his intention to file a motion for summary judgment to get Burger King dismissed from the case. Approximately 4 months after the lawsuit was filed, the defendants provided answers to written questions and requests for documents during the discovery phase. The documents revealed that while the restaurant hired off-duty police as security, they were generally only present from 7:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m., leaving the restaurant without security during the early morning opening and the late-night hours, even though the drive-thru stayed open until midnight. The attorneys requested incident reports for all 15 Burger King restaurants owned by Stillwater in the area for the preceding 7 years, and when Rasmussen realized his client had not turned over all relevant reports, he contacted Ron Stillwater, Harold's son, who located the missing documents. Rasmussen acted honorably and turned them over immediately, and when Miraldi and Barrett analyzed the reports, they identified 12 gun-related crimes involving employees or customers at the specific Burger King where Marie was shot over the preceding 7 years. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In November 1988, Marie underwent her fourth and final major surgery to remove the metal plates that had been installed on both sides of her jaw during previous reconstruction efforts. Following the surgery, Marie experienced significant swelling again, describing it as grotesque, and noting that she looked as though she had been beaten by a baseball bat. She avoided mirrors during this recovery period and remained unemployed throughout the end of 1988 due to the surgery and the recovery time required for the swelling to recede. On a particularly windy January day in 1989, Marie arrived to prepare for her deposition. She wore a dark green business suit with a high-collared beige blouse, dressed like the attorney she had been before the shooting. She told Ben Barrett and David Miraldi she had been looking forward to this. Barrett explained an unconventional strategy. Normally, lawyers coached clients to answer briefly, to give opposing counsel as little as possible. He wanted Marie to do the opposite, to speak expansively, to let the defense see exactly how effective she would be in front of a jury. Marie had brought her own preparation materials, a folder containing handwritten summaries documenting her medical ordeal and the limitations she now lived with. Miraldi delivered unwelcome news. The defendants were alleging comparative negligence, arguing Marie bore partial responsibility for her own injuries. Her reaction was immediate and sharp. What was she supposed to do? Let him into the car? Her attorneys assured her this was standard insurance company tactics, nothing personal. Marie clarified what she wanted from this lawsuit. She was not trying to destroy anyone financially. She wanted acknowledgement of the failure and concrete changes to prevent another woman from suffering what she had endured. The deposition convened the following morning. Marie sat across from John Rasmussen and Frank Soldat. Andy Wargo from Liberty Mutual attended as well, along with a court reporter to transcribe everything. Rasmussen conducted the questioning with studied politeness, probing her background, her education, her legal career, her husband's business. Marie understood the strategy. He was building a portrait of privilege to distance her from working-class jurors who might decide the case. When Rasmussen turned to the shooting itself, Marie walked him through every detail. He asked whether she had considered that the gunman's hand might strike the door frame when she accelerated the car. Marie explained the calculations she had made in those compressed seconds. The men intended to force their way into the back seat. She believed they would rape her and kill her. The image that filled her mind was her dead body dumped in a vacant lot. She chose the risk of a bullet over the certainty of what waited if she let them in. The court reporter's eyebrows lifted at the power of Marie's description. The comparative negligence argument had just collapsed. Marie cataloged her losses without dramatics or self-pity. She was unemployed. Preferred Health had let her go after a year of surgeries made it impossible to work. She had updated her resume and remained optimistic about future employment. Her speech had improved but remained impaired. She struggled to enunciate certain sounds, had to speak slowly and deliberately, could not even say her own name clearly. If she lost focus, her throat muscles would tense and her pitch would rise uncontrollably. The nerve damage had stolen her sense of taste. Crackers, she told them, tasted like gravel. She had lost all feeling in her chin and lower lip, which meant she could not detect food on her face or know when she was drooling. She had learned to compensate by keeping a finger pressed under her lip. Her jaw would not close properly when she chewed and could not move side to side. She listed the foods now beyond her reach: ice cream cones, raw vegetables, corn on the cob, pizza, fried chicken, peanuts, popcorn, most sandwiches. The catalog went on. She described the psychological toll. She was obsessive now about locking doors. She had wanted to buy a gun for protection until Chuck refused. She no longer recognized herself as the healthy, confident woman who had existed before December 11, 1987. That person was gone. Throughout the deposition, Ben Barrett watched Marie's performance and scrawled a large upward-pointing arrow on his legal pad. When Rasmussen finished his questioning, he had nothing further. Soldat declined to ask any questions at all. 2 weeks later, on February 13th, attorneys deposed Ronald Stillwater, the franchise owner's son who managed day-to-day operations. When asked whether he had considered security improvements after Brittany Kirkpatrick was abducted from the same Burger King 6 weeks before Marie was shot, Stillwater acknowledged they had discussed pricing video cameras and extending security guard hours. He admitted none of these discussions had produced any actual changes before the shooting. What he did not mention during this deposition, and what would later prove crucial, was any attempt to install fencing or any problems with the building department. The omission would come back to haunt the defense. In May, Marie's legal team received Rick Newman's expert report. Newman, a security consultant from Houston, had traveled to Cleveland, inspected the Burger King site, and reached unequivocal conclusions. Both the franchisee and Burger King Corporation had failed to exercise ordinary care. The restaurant's 2 hours of daily security guard coverage was grossly inadequate. Guards should have been present during all dark hours. The property needed closed-circuit cameras monitoring the drive-thru and parking lot. Fencing should have been erected to control access. Employees should have received training to recognize and respond to suspicious loitering. Most damning for the corporation, Burger King's operations manual contained a section labeled Security that was completely blank. The attorneys conducted additional depositions to lock down testimony before trial. Mylena Albright, who had been 18 when the shooting occurred, revealed she still woke from nightmares seeing Marie's blood spreading across the counter. She confirmed the restaurant had no cameras covering the exterior, only one inside aimed at the cash register. She had received zero security training. The guards who worked evening shifts typically stayed inside the dining room protecting the money, venturing outside only to escort the manager making the night deposit. 2 weeks after the shooting, Albright had quit because she felt unsafe arriving at 6 in the morning to open the restaurant in darkness with no security present. Ronald Stillwater admitted during his second deposition that the restaurant provided no security training to crew members. He justified this by claiming the young employees were unreliable and you could not throw too much responsibility at them. He confirmed he had learned about the Kirkpatrick abduction the day after it occurred, but acknowledged that no security changes were implemented between that attack and Marie's shooting. They had not stationed guards during late-night drive-through hours because they assumed customers were not at risk. Most previous crimes had targeted employees inside the building. Jack Artman, Burger King's regional representative, provided testimony that established corporate liability. Under questioning, he admitted Burger King's operations manual dictated standards for everything from employee uniforms to food temperature. The corporation retained the right to revoke a franchise for non-compliance with these standards. This meant Burger King exercised control over franchisees, which potentially made them liable for security failures. Artman also confirmed that the manual contained no recommendations for customer safety measures. Months after Newman's report arrived, the attorneys attended a settlement conference with the judge's staff attorney. Rasmussen indicated Liberty Mutual was evaluating the case and might make an offer, though he maintained the defense that the crime was unforeseeable. Soldat refused to offer anything, insisting Burger King did not operate the restaurant and had an indemnification agreement shielding them from liability. The staff attorney set the trial for October 2nd and warned that no continuances would be granted. A week before trial, the attorneys drove to Columbus to videotape Mylena Albright's testimony. She was attending Ohio State University and had not been subpoenaed, so she was under no legal obligation to appear. Rasmussen had voluntarily disclosed her location, an act of professional courtesy that would cost his case dearly. The deposition at the Ohio State Bar Association office lasted 30 minutes, with Albright repeating her account of inadequate security and explaining why fear had driven her to quit. The day before trial, the case was reassigned from Judge James Kilcoyne to visiting Judge Robert Lawther due to scheduling backlogs. Lawther, a former Lakewood mayor known for running an efficient courtroom, moved the proceedings to the old courthouse, a Beaux-Arts structure with marble floors and soaring ceilings that felt like stepping back into another era after the modern brutalism of the Justice Center. Lawther convened a settlement conference. Liberty Mutual offered $150,000. Travelers, representing Burger King, offered nothing. Marie and her attorneys rejected the money. Accepting a settlement that allowed the defendants to avoid admitting fault defeated the entire purpose of the lawsuit. Jury selection began the morning of October 3rd. 18 candidates entered the courtroom, 12 of them women. The pool consisted largely of working and middle-class people, steelworkers, teachers, retail workers, rather than professionals. Barrett focused on ensuring jurors understood they would decide the case based on a preponderance of evidence, a 51% standard, not the reasonable doubt standard from criminal trials. Rasmussen made sure to mention that Marie's children attended Hawken, a private school, subtly highlighting her financial comfort. Soldat emphasized repeatedly that Burger King Corporation did not operate this particular restaurant. 8 jurors and an alternate were selected. Opening statements began at 3 that afternoon. Barrett laid out the security failures systematically: absent guards, missing cameras, no perimeter fencing, and reminded jurors that Brittany Kirkpatrick had been abducted from this same location 6 weeks before Marie was shot. He described Marie's permanent injuries, the destroyed nerves, the lost sense of taste. Rasmussen countered by humanizing Harold Stillwater as a former Marine who had invested in a high-crime neighborhood specifically to provide jobs for people who needed them. The cause of Marie's injuries, he argued, was the criminal who pulled the trigger, not the restaurant. Soldat kept his remarks brief, reiterating that Burger King had no involvement in daily operations. The second day of trial brought testimony from Detective Novak, who described the arrests and confirmed that no security improvements had been made between the Kirkpatrick and Grossman attacks. Patrolman Hupka presented photographs showing the restaurant had no rear windows and no surveillance cameras. Sheila Williams testified about watching the two men loiter in the parking lot for more than an hour without any employee noticing or responding. The videotaped deposition of Mylena Albright played on a screen. The guards, she confirmed, stayed inside protecting cash rather than monitoring customers. That afternoon, Ronald Stillwater took the stand and the defense's case began to fracture. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Ronald Stillwater admitted there were no cameras and no employee training. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed he had tried to install a fence around the property, but had been stopped by red tape at the Cleveland Building Department. Barrett immediately confronted him with his February deposition transcript. Stillwater had mentioned considering cameras and extending guard hours. He had never said a word about a fence. Stillwater insisted it must have slipped his mind. Barrett and Miraldi exchanged glances. Something felt wrong. At 4 o'clock, as the session ended, they raced to Cleveland City Hall before it closed. They found Anthony Constanzo in the building department and asked to see the file for the Burger King property. Constanzo pulled the records. No fence application. No notes about phone calls regarding a fence. Nothing. The attorneys subpoenaed Constanzo on the spot to testify the following morning. On October 5th, Constanzo took the stand and methodically destroyed Ron Stillwater's credibility. The building department file contained no record of any fence application and no documentation of any conversations about fencing. Stillwater had fabricated the story. Jack Artman followed, and under Barrett's cross-examination, admitted that Burger King's operations manual established standards for everything from uniforms to food temperature. The corporation retained the right to revoke any franchise that failed to comply. This established the right of control that made Burger King potentially liable. Marie testified about the shooting and its aftermath. On cross-examination, Rasmussen tried to resurrect the comparative negligence argument, questioning her decision to step on the accelerator. Marie looked at the jurors and explained calmly that she believed the men intended to rape and murder her. Pressing the gas pedal was the only choice that gave her any chance of survival. The jurors' faces showed they understood. When the court broke for lunch on October 5, 1989, Judge Lawther delivered unexpected news to the plaintiff's team. The defendants were prepared to settle for the full amount Marie and her attorneys had demanded, though the exact figure would remain confidential. The morning's testimony had proven catastrophic for the defense. Ron Stillwater's fabricated fence story had been exposed by building department records, and Jack Artman's admissions had established corporate liability for Burger King. The defense recognized their position had become untenable. Marie's response surprised her legal team. Rather than relief, she expressed hesitation, questioning whether accepting money would accomplish anything if the restaurant owner felt no obligation to change. Her attorneys reminded her that the settlement included terms she could negotiate, and Marie made clear what she required: a private meeting with Harold Stillwater himself. The afternoon session proceeded with Rick Newman's expert testimony cataloging the security failures at the restaurant. He walked through each deficiency methodically. The testimony reinforced what the jury had already concluded, but by then the outcome had been determined during the lunch recess. Weeks later, in late October or early November, Marie arrived alone at John Rasmussen's law office in Lakewood for the meeting she had demanded. Harold Stillwater was there with his attorney, and the three sat down in what would become an unusual conclusion to litigation. Marie had come prepared with a legal pad containing notes for what she described as her closing argument, the statement she would have delivered to the jury had the case continued to verdict. She began by addressing the lie his son had told under oath. Without raising her voice, she explained how her legal team had obtained the complete building department file and brought in the city employee to testify. The records had proven there was no fence application, no telephone notes, no evidence of any attempt to install security barriers. She looked at Harold Stillwater directly and said she wanted him to speak with his son about what had happened in that courtroom, then added she would say nothing more on the subject. Harold agreed quietly that he would do so. As Marie spoke, John Rasmussen understood with painful clarity how completely that single lie had destroyed their defense. He thought back to sitting at the counsel table, forcing his face to remain neutral, while Anthony Constanzo testified about the empty file, knowing in that moment they had lost all credibility with the jury. The decision to settle had been inevitable from that point forward. Marie then began reading from her prepared statement, speaking for nearly 20 minutes about what the shooting had taken from her. She described the instant when Thompson appeared at her window with the gun, the calculations she had made in the seconds that followed, that these men intended not simply to rob her, but to force her into the back seat, to take her somewhere, to rape and kill her, and leave her body discarded. She explained why she had chosen to press the accelerator despite the weapon aimed at her head, why she had believed death in that parking lot was preferable to what waited for her otherwise. She recounted stumbling into the restaurant afterward, one hand holding her shattered jaw in place, trying not to bleed to death before reaching help. She walked him through the 2 years that followed. 4 surgeries, each requiring doctors to harvest pieces of her hip bone to rebuild what the bullet had destroyed. Months with her jaw wired immobile, the constant fear of vomiting and choking because her mouth could not open. The tracheostomy tube in her throat that made breathing feel like drowning. The permanent nerve damage that left her unable to taste food, unable to feel her own face, unable to speak clearly without conscious effort. She told him she was no longer the same woman who had pulled into that drive-thru, that the confident attorney she had been existed only in memory now. But the damage extended beyond her own body, she explained. Her husband had been forced to transform from businessman to nurse, learning medical procedures he had never imagined performing, feeding her through tubes and changing surgical dressings while managing the chaos this crisis had brought into their home. Her younger son carried guilt he had never voiced, believing the shooting was his fault because she had stopped for food while rushing to watch him wrestle. Her older son, away at college, suffered from the distance and helplessness of being unable to protect or care for her when she needed him most. Harold Stillwater had remained still throughout her statement, but when Marie finished, his eyes had filled with tears. The former Marine, known for his rigid business demeanor, stood and asked if he could embrace her. When Marie rose, he pulled her into his arms and apologized for what she had endured. Then he offered what Marie had sought from the beginning, assurance that his company was implementing security changes to prevent another woman from suffering as she had. Marie acknowledged that no one at the restaurant had intended this outcome, that the negligence had been passive rather than malicious, but that understanding the lack of intent did not erase the consequences. She told him she appreciated his willingness to hear her and his commitment to change. John Rasmussen, watching this exchange, felt something release in the room. He found himself wondering whether the entire lawsuit, with all its cost and acrimony, might have been unnecessary if Stillwater had simply visited Marie in the hospital 2 years earlier to offer this same apology and promise. When Marie walked out of that office, she carried something the settlement check could never have provided. She had been heard. The man responsible had looked her in the face and acknowledged what his failures had cost. It was, in its way, more valuable than any verdict a jury could have rendered. Marie created what she called a feel-good fund with the money from the settlement, writing anonymous checks to strangers she read about in newspaper articles who were down on their luck and needed help. About a year later, she ran into John Rasmussen on Detroit Road in Lakewood near the White Door Saloon. When he mentioned being glad the case had resolved, she told him what she had been doing with the settlement money. Rasmussen remarked that he would likely distribute millions in insurance settlements over his career, but he doubted anyone else would choose to spend it this way. Outwardly, Marie's life in the years that followed appeared full and balanced. She managed a consulting business, maintained friendships, stayed close to her family. But beneath this surface rhythm lived something darker and unfinished. Sometimes she would think about Richard Thompson and wonder about his parole, and these thoughts would bring a flutter of anxiety that she learned to push away by keeping busy. Other thoughts came unbidden, violent fantasies where an intruder broke into her home and she had a gun within reach, where she fired and hit her target perfectly, where she proved to herself that the world's bad guys would never touch her again. These fantasies felt empowering, like reclaiming something stolen. She listened to talk radio occasionally, and during what was likely Pat Buchanan's presidential campaign, she heard a caller declare that America's problems could be solved if people would just lock and load. The phrase stopped her cold. She recognized her own internal voice in those words and felt revulsion at what she heard. The tough-talking bravado she had cultivated felt suddenly weak and pathetic. On a Friday evening in late January 1996, she and Chuck went to see Dead Man Walking. During a scene where a murdered boy's father tells a nun, "I am filled with so much hate," Marie began crying in the theater. Afterward, she tried to explain to Chuck what had happened. The line had worked like a mirror, she said, reflecting something she had been avoiding for 8 years. She was still filled with hate for Thompson. She had never let it go. That spring, her friend Susan Umbernor invited her to speak at a Women's Watch vigil in Public Square, an event honoring Sister Anita, an Ursuline nun raped and murdered in El Salvador in 1980. Marie initially refused, insisting she was not a victim and would not be labeled as one. She was simply a person who had been shot, nothing more. She only agreed when Susan promised the organizers would never use that word to describe her. The vigil took place on a cool, crisp evening with several hundred people gathered near the Terminal Tower and the Civil War Monument. Marie dressed warmly to keep any tremor from entering her voice. She began with the comfortable narrative she had told many times, her survival, her gratitude for medical care, the fact that her assailants were in prison. Then she said something she had never said publicly before. The physical healing had taken about 2 years, she told the crowd, but emotionally and spiritually she had not healed. There was a place inside that remained raw. She confessed to her revenge fantasies for the first time. She often imagined shooting Richard Thompson, she said, specifically in the jaw. It was pure revenge, but it also made her feel strong, helped her preserve some sense of self. Drawing on what she had learned from the film and the radio caller, she told the audience that this desire for retaliation was not actually strength. The "you can't hurt me" attitude was weak, even pathetic. She posed a question to the crowd. How do women protect themselves without sinking to the level of those who would harm them, without being consumed by anger and fear? Then she admitted she did not have an answer. She had wanted to end her remarks with wisdom, she said, but she was not there yet. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. One morning in March 1997, Marie woke with a thought that seemed to come from nowhere, but stood unmistakably clear in her mind. She needed to visit Richard Thompson in prison. The realization brought no fear or anxiety, only a strange calm. This was the final step of a journey she had been on for nearly 10 years. It was not optional, it was something she had to do. She told herself she needed to complete the healing process. She wanted to speak to Thompson as a person, rather than as an abstraction, to see who he was now, whether he had changed, whether he still thought about that night. They would always be connected because of what happened, she reasoned, and they needed to talk about it. There was also a practical concern. She wanted to assess his mental state before his release, to verify for herself that he was not a ranting, dangerous man who would come looking for her once he was free. Chuck thought the idea was crazy and dangerous. Marie assured him she would not be reckless, that she would vet Thompson first to make sure it was safe. Chuck argued that an angry convict would never agree to see her, but Marie had a gut feeling that Thompson would want to explain why the gun went off. If he refused, she would accept that and let it go. A few weeks later, she attended a seminar on violence where she heard Debbie Morris, whose story had inspired Dead Man Walking, describe an inexplicable need to talk to the man who had brutalized her. Hearing this made Marie feel validated in her decision. She contacted the parole office and was referred to the Office of Victim Services within the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction. An administrative assistant explained that while the agency planned to facilitate meetings between prisoners and victims, the program was not yet operational. The funding had just been appropriated, and they were still developing safety guidelines, particularly after an incident where a victim had been stabbed during an unsanctioned prison visit. Marie should call back in a few months, the assistant said, or perhaps early 1998. Marie pressed for an exception. The assistant warned her she could not visit an inmate on her own and was required to go through the program. Marie asked to speak with Karen Ho, the person in charge. The assistant urged patience, noting that Ho was a victim herself and would help if she could, but she was currently unavailable. When Marie had not heard back after 4 days, she called again. Ho was working on it, she was told, but could make no guarantees. The timeline created immense pressure. Marie explained that waiting until 1998 was impossible because Thompson had a parole hearing the following month. On April 18th, the Office of Victim Services confirmed that Thompson's parole had been granted and he was scheduled for release on or after June 9, 1997. With less than 2 months remaining and OVS failing to return her calls for a week, Marie began considering more drastic measures, contacting influential people to intervene, or even holding a press conference to force the issue into public view. In mid-May, Marie sent 3 letters to state officials demanding closure before Thompson's release, 2 to the Department of Rehabilitation and Correction and 1 to the Department of Public Safety. She received no response. Inside the prison, Thompson's case manager, Frank Malone, approached Thompson about the meeting. Thompson was immediately suspicious, believing Marie intended to interfere with his parole. Malone used his rapport with Thompson, appealing to the values Thompson's parents had instilled in him, and eventually Thompson agreed on the condition that he receive written confirmation the meeting would not affect his parole. 2 days before the scheduled meeting, Karen Ho secured the written statement Thompson had demanded. She called Marie to confirm the meeting was set for June 6, 1997, just 3 days before Thompson's scheduled release. Marie had told Ho she was approaching this in a spirit of reconciliation, seeking closure and completion of a healing process that had taken nearly 10 years. She wanted to understand who Thompson was now, whether he had changed, and why the gun had gone off that night in the Burger King parking lot. She did not come in anger, she said. She came because they would always be connected by what happened, and she needed to face that connection directly before he walked back into the world. While Marie wrestled with her unresolved anger in the outside world, Richard Thompson lived behind the walls of the Southeastern Correctional Institution. His first years inside were turbulent. He spent substantial time in solitary confinement, isolated in what inmates called the hole, after repeatedly getting into fights and running an illegal business selling cigarettes and snacks to other prisoners, collecting debts with his fists when necessary. Eventually, he grew tired of the isolation and made a calculated decision that following the rules was the only path out of that darkness. During those years in prison, Thompson's father died. He was not permitted to attend the funeral. Later, he would identify this forced separation from family, being unable to say goodbye to his father, as the most difficult part of his incarceration, more difficult than the violence or the isolation or the loss of freedom. He would cite it as his primary motivation for staying out of trouble after release, saying he never wanted to be in that position again. The loss carried particular weight because his father had been a strong presence in his life, a man who worked multiple jobs to support the family and volunteered as a youth basketball coach at the YMCA, always bringing Richard along to play and learn from older boys. When Thompson had been arrested, he admitted he had cried not just from fear, but from shame at disappointing parents who were good people and had provided for him. The memory of his father would later influence his decision to meet Marie. When his case manager, Frank Malone, urged him to consider the meeting, Malone reminded Thompson that he was better than all this because his parents had taught him better. And this appeal to his father's values struck something deep in Thompson that made him reconsider. Thompson also lost contact with his daughter. She had been 6 months old when he was incarcerated. He saw her once when she was 4, then did not see her again until his release, missing her entire childhood during those years. On the morning of June 6, 1997, Marie and her friend Peggy Kuechley drove 2.5 hours to Lancaster, Ohio. Marie had been subdued during the trip, listening to the radio rather than talking. They arrived at a Bob Evans restaurant around 9:30 a.m. to meet Karen Ho, the facilitator from the Office of Victim Services. Ho warned Marie not to set her expectations too high, cautioning that Thompson might not say much or might say something offensive. She emphasized the necessity of strict protocols, referencing a past incident where a victim who arranged an unsanctioned meeting had been stabbed by an inmate. The women drove to the Southeastern Correctional Institution in convoy with Karen leading. They passed under a wrought iron sign featuring a silhouette of Ohio and a red cardinal. The grounds initially resembled a college campus or cemetery because of the trees, but the peaceful illusion vanished when they saw the chain-link fences topped with barbed wire. After clearing a security checkpoint, they parked at the warden's office a little after 10 o'clock. While Karen and Peggy went inside, Marie remained outside alone for 15 minutes, centering herself by focusing on her breathing and studying the nearby azaleas and rhododendrons. The meeting took place in a conference room next to the warden's office, furnished with a long mahogany table and 10 cushioned chairs. Karen sat at the head of the table with Marie to her left and Peggy beside her. The assistant warden sat at the far end. Marie set up her space like an attorney at a deposition, placing her briefcase on the floor and laying out a yellow pad and typewritten questions on the table. Richard Thompson entered with Frank Malone, his case manager. Marie noted immediately that Thompson had changed significantly since 1987. No longer thin and wiry, he was heavy now, resembling a football player, wearing dark blue prison pants and a light blue shirt stained with perspiration. He was not handcuffed. He appeared anxious, rubbing his palms together, looking down, sweating. Inside, his heart was racing, and he was already regretting agreeing to this meeting. Marie opened by asking if she could call him Richard, and stated clearly that she had not come in anger. Thompson began recounting his background, describing a good upbringing with church-going parents, his loss of a basketball scholarship, his descent into drug use and robbery to support his habit. When they turned to discussing the crime itself, Thompson explained that he and Christopher Martin had been waiting at the Burger King for 2 hours, high on marijuana, intending to force a driver to take them to an ATM. Nobody was supposed to get hurt, he insisted, repeating his long-held assertion that the gun went off accidentally when the car moved. Marie pushed back firmly. "You put a loaded gun to my temple, Richard," she said. "That part was no accident." Thompson admitted responsibility then, saying he was really sorry for what he had done, that he was the one who did it, and expressing regret for running away instead of checking on her. Marie began detailing the physical and emotional devastation the shooting had caused, The surgeries, the bone grafts harvested from her hips, the months with her jaw wired shut, the tracheostomy tube, the permanent nerve damage that robbed her of taste and clear speech, the way her husband had been forced to become her nurse, the guilt her younger son carried believing the shooting was his fault because she had stopped for food on the way to his wrestling match, the distress of her older son who could not be home to help. As Marie spoke, Karen Ho noticed something the others missed. Thompson's shoulders were shaking. She sensed he was on the verge of tears. Karen interrupted the session to ask if he needed to take a break. Thompson admitted that he did. Thompson and Karen stepped into the hallway with Frank Malone. Away from Marie, Thompson's composure crumbled. He cried openly, tears running down his face. He told Karen and Frank that he felt messed up, that he had hurt everybody in that family. He expressed disbelief at his own actions, asking his case manager how he could have done this to such a nice lady. Karen used the moment to reinforce the purpose of the dialogue, telling him now he knew, and it was always better to know, wasn't it? Thompson did not answer and remained silent. Karen offered to stop the session entirely or take as much time as needed. Thompson asked for another minute to pull himself together, insisting he would be all right. A few minutes later, he signaled he was ready and returned to the conference room composed, hoping that Marie and Peggy did not suspect he had been crying outside. When they resumed, Thompson asked a question that revealed his confusion. He did not understand why she just did not want to hurt him. Marie met his gaze and admitted that for many years she had desired revenge. She had wanted to cause him the same pain he had caused her. She confessed the specific nature of her fantasy. She had wanted to shoot him right through the jaw. She explained that she had struggled with that anger for a long time, but she felt it was gone now. She did not want the anger to return, which was a major reason she had come to the prison to speak with him person to person. After a period of silence, Thompson shifted the conversation away from himself and asked how her sons were doing now. Marie smiled and assured him they were doing very well. She perceived his concern for her children as genuine, and this display of empathy opened something in her. A new thought took hold. She realized she would probably forgive him eventually. If she was eventually going to forgive him anyway, why not just do it now? She viewed this immediate decision as her gift to him. Marie leaned forward in her chair, re-established eye contact with Thompson, and offered something she had not planned to say. "Richard, I didn't think I would ever say these words to you, but I forgive you." The room fell silent, and she saw relief in his eyes, then added, "And you need to forgive yourself." Thompson nodded in response. Marie felt an unexpected sense of peace, lightness, and relief, as though the burden of anger had been physically lifted from her. They discussed Thompson's plans to live with his mother and reconnect with his daughter upon his release. The meeting ended with Marie asking if he would like to shake hands. Thompson looked to his case manager for permission, then shook her hand. Years later, Thompson would recall the meeting vividly, remembering that Marie spoke to him person to person and that her forgiveness lifted a huge weight off his shoulders. On the drive home that day, Marie felt elated. Later, she would reflect that while the elation faded, it was replaced by something more sustainable, a lasting peace and a hope that Richard would have a good life. Around 2017, David Miraldi discovered an address for Richard Thompson in Marie's old papers and took a chance, sending a letter to explain he was writing about her story. The address was at least 2 decades old, and for months he heard nothing. Then the missed calls started appearing from a number he didn't recognize. When they finally spoke, Thompson's first words were an apology for taking so long to respond. The reason for his silence had nothing to do with reluctance about the book itself. Thompson had built a new life since 1997, one that included a teenage daughter who knew nothing about the 9 years her father had spent behind bars. Before he could sit down with a writer to discuss those years, he needed to tell his daughter the truth about who he had been. When he finally did, both she and his wife told him he should meet with Miraldi and tell the story. Finding time proved difficult. Thompson's schedule ran 6 days of work, followed by Sunday morning church services, leaving almost no margin for anything else. They settled on a Sunday afternoon in early July 2018, agreeing to meet halfway between their homes. Thompson refused Maraldi's offer to drive to his house, preferring the neutral ground of a Red Robin in North Olmsted. Maraldi arrived early and waited. When Thompson walked through the door just before 2 o'clock, Maraldi saw a man utterly transformed from the thin 19-year-old who had pointed a gun through Marie's car window 30 years earlier. Thompson stood well over 6 feet tall and carried more than 300 pounds on his frame. He moved with an easy, unhurried confidence, dressed simply in a short-sleeved shirt and gray cotton pants. Their handshake was awkward, neither man quite sure how to greet the other, Thompson's large hand closing around Maraldi's fingers before they properly connected. They settled into a booth, and Maraldi asked if he could record their conversation for accuracy. Thompson had no objection. When the waitress came, Thompson ordered without hesitation a cheeseburger with curly fries, asking if the restaurant still did unlimited refills on the fries. He grinned as he explained that his wife kept close watch on his cholesterol, but sometimes a man just needed to eat what he wanted. Over the next 2 hours, the waitress would return multiple times to refill his basket. Thompson described the life he had built after walking out of Southeastern Correctional Institution. He had done exactly what he told Marie he would do during their prison meeting, moved back in with his mother and sisters, focused on rebuilding. Within weeks of his release, he met a woman through his mother's best friend. Something clicked between them immediately. 19 years had passed since their wedding. She taught school. They had a daughter together who excelled in her studies, and Thompson had also reconnected with the daughter born before his incarceration, who had been 10 when he got out and whom he had seen only once during those lost years. Work had come steadily. He trained as a machinist and held jobs consistently, experiencing only one brief stretch of unemployment when a shop closed and he needed to find another position. His mother and wife had pushed him back toward the church he had abandoned as a teenager, and he had embraced it fully, serving as a deacon for nearly a decade. Staying clean had required help. He credited a sponsor from Narcotics Anonymous who hadn't gone easy on him, who had held him accountable when he needed it most. There had been one more meeting with Marie that Thompson mentioned in passing. Sometime after his release, she had reached out through his parole officer to ask if he would see her again, this time outside prison walls. She wanted to check on his progress and felt that meeting as free people rather than across a prison table might level the ground between them. Thompson agreed and brought his fiancée to the parole office where they met. Marie seemed genuinely pleased to learn he had found work and was moving forward. The conversation stayed cordial and brief. They never saw each other again after that day. When Thompson spoke about his time inside, the losses he described carried more weight than the violence or the isolation. Missing his father's funeral haunted him still, being locked away when his family needed him, unable to say goodbye. He had missed watching his oldest daughter grow from an infant into a child, seeing her once in all those years. The early part of his sentence had been marked by frequent trips to solitary confinement for fighting and running small hustles, but eventually the exhaustion of isolation wore him down, and he made a conscious choice to follow the rules and get out of the hole. Prison had also given him perspective he lacked as a teenager. His parents had always given him what he needed, he realized, even when they couldn't afford everything he wanted. He had been too young and foolish to understand the difference. Without warning, Thompson shifted the conversation and asked how Marie was doing now. Maraldi told him she had retired and was spending her time with her husband and grandchildren, enjoying the life she had rebuilt. Maraldi then turned the question back. What did Thompson remember about that day in June 1997 when Marie came to see him in prison? Thompson's demeanor changed as he thought back. He had gone into that meeting terrified, unsure whether she would scream at him or strike him or simply unleash the rage he assumed she must feel. Instead, she had been calm. She treated him like a human being, spoke to him as an equal rather than looking down at him as the criminal who had destroyed her life. He remembered having to ask for a break because the weight of what she was saying overwhelmed him, and tears started coming that he desperately didn't want anyone to see. Sitting across from this kind woman whose jaw he had shattered felt surreal and suffocating. When she told him she forgave him, something massive lifted off him that he hadn't fully realized he was carrying. As they prepared to leave the restaurant, Thompson asked Miraldi to pass along his greetings to Marie. Miraldi said he would make sure she got a full account of their conversation.